During family dinner, my aunt laughed and said, "You'll probably be alone forever, just like your father." I said nothing. The next morning, she found out I'd canceled my financial support for her son's tuition. I, 32M, never expected a family dinner to become the catalyst for burning down relationships I'd spent years carefully maintaining. But sometimes, people push you past the point where silence stops being strength and starts being weakness. The comment came during dessert. My aunt had been drinking. Nothing unusual there, but the wine had loosened her tongue more than normal. We were all gathered at my parents' house for my younger brother's engagement celebration. About 15 people crowded around the extended dining table. The conversation had somehow drifted to my perpetually single status, a topic my family found endlessly fascinating despite my repeated requests to drop it. My aunt leaned back in her chair, glass in hand, and said it loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'd probably be alone forever, just like my father." The table went quiet. She laughed, that particular laugh people use when they want to pass off cruelty as humor. A few nervous chuckles rippled around the room. My mother's face went pale. My father stared at his plate. I didn't react. I've learned over the years that immediate responses rarely serve you well. I simply nodded, took another bite of the chocolate cake my mother had made, and let the conversation move on. My aunt seemed almost disappointed by my lack of reaction, but she'd already moved on to critiquing my cousin's career choices. What my aunt didn't know, what nobody at that table knew except my accountant, was that I'd been paying her son's college tuition for the past 3 years. $28,000 annually. Private university, out of state, the works. Her son, my cousin, was a decent kid who'd gotten caught in the crossfire of his parents' messy divorce 5 years back. His father had disappeared, leaving behind debt and broken promises. My aunt worked 2 jobs, but barely kept the lights on. When my cousin got his acceptance letter, she'd come to me privately, desperate. She'd asked if I could help, just for the first year until she figured something out. I'd agreed, but with one condition: nobody could know. I didn't want the family treating me differently, didn't want the questions or the assumptions about my finances. She'd agreed readily, probably thinking I'd cave after a year anyway. I never did. 3 years, $84,000, and I'd planned to cover his senior year too. He was set to graduate next May. The kid had no idea where the money came from. His mother told him she'd taken out loans, that they'd figure it out together after graduation. That night, after I left my parents' house, I sat in my car for 20 minutes before driving home. The comment kept replaying. "Just like your father." She'd weaponized my family's pain for a cheap laugh. My father's first wife had left him after 2 years of marriage, taken everything, and vanished. He'd spent a decade alone before meeting my mother. It remained the deepest wound in his life, something he rarely discussed, even with us. By the time I got home, I'd made my decision. Monday morning, I called my accountant. The conversation took less than 5 minutes. I wanted to stop all payments related to my cousin's education effective immediately. She asked if I was sure, mentioned the timing. We were only 2 months into the fall semester. I told her I'd never been more certain about anything. Then I drafted an email to the university's financial aid office, explaining that I would no longer be covering the costs. They'd need to work directly with the student and his family going forward. I sent it before I could reconsider. The last step was the hardest. I wrote my cousin a letter explaining everything: who'd actually been paying his tuition, why I'd done it anonymously, and why I could no longer continue. I told him this wasn't his fault, that he deserved to finish his education, and that I hoped he'd find a way. I included information about emergency student loans and suggested he speak with his financial aid advisor immediately. I mailed it to his dorm that afternoon. I didn't contact my aunt. I figured she'd find out soon enough. She did. Wednesday morning, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m. My aunt's name flashed across the screen 15 times before I finally answered. She was screaming before I could say hello, demanding to know what I'd done, calling me every name she could think of. I let her vent for about 30 seconds before I interrupted. I asked her if she remembered what she'd said at dinner. She went silent. Then she tried to backtrack, claimed it was just a joke, that I was being too sensitive. I told her I'd spent $84,000 supporting her son's education while she made jokes at my expense. The line went dead quiet. She asked if I was really going to destroy her son's future over one comment. I corrected her. I wasn't destroying anything. I was simply withdrawing support I was never obligated to provide in the first place. What she'd said wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of years of subtle digs, dismissive comments, and casual cruelty she thought I'd just absorb indefinitely. She started crying, begging me to reconsider. Her son would have to drop out. She couldn't afford the tuition. I told her she'd told him she'd taken out loans anyway, so perhaps she should actually do that now. Then I hung up. Within hours, my phone exploded. My mother called, horrified, asking how I could do this to family. My brother sent texts calling me vindictive. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years suddenly had opinions about my character. The family group chat, which I'd muted years ago, apparently devoted an entire day to discussing what a terrible person I'd become. Only my father stayed silent. Thursday evening, he showed up at my apartment. We sat on my balcony, drinking beer, not talking for a long time. Finally, he asked me if I was okay. Not if I was going to change my mind. Not if I'd considered the consequences. Just if I was okay. I told him honestly I didn't know yet. He nodded, took another drink, and told me what my aunt had said at dinner was unforgivable. He said he understood why I'd stayed quiet in the moment, but he wished I'd said something. Let him defend himself, defend us. I explained that defending ourselves would have just created a bigger scene, given her more attention. This way felt cleaner. My father asked if I regretted helping my cousin at all. I thought about it carefully before answering. I didn't regret it. My cousin was a good kid caught in a bad situation. But I did resent that my generosity had apparently earned me nothing except the license for his mother to mock me publicly. He stayed for another hour. Before he left, he mentioned that my aunt had called him too, demanding he talk sense into me. He'd told her that maybe she should have thought about consequences before running her mouth. I appreciated that more than I could express. Friday brought my cousin's call. He was crying, panicking, asking me why I was doing this to him. I let him get it all out before explaining, calmly, that I'd supported his education anonymously for 3 years. His mother had lied to him about the loans. And while I cared about his future, I couldn't continue subsidizing someone whose parent felt entitled to humiliate me for entertainment. He went quiet. Then he asked why his mother would lie about something like that. I told him he'd have to ask her himself. He wanted to know if there was anything he could do to change my mind. I told him the truth. This wasn't about him, and I genuinely hoped he found a way to finish school, but I was done. The call ended badly. He hung up angry, which I understood. From his perspective, I just torpedoed his education over something his mother said. He didn't understand the full context, the years of accumulated disrespect, the way his mother had consistently treated my kindness as weakness. The weekend was brutal. My mother showed up Saturday morning, asking me to reconsider for the sake of family unity. I asked her if family unity mattered when her sister humiliated her husband at the dinner table. She didn't have an answer for that. She tried the guilt approach next, thinking about what this would do to my cousin's future, his dreams, his opportunities. I reminded her that I'd already thought about all of that for 3 years while writing checks nobody knew about. I'd thought about it when I adjusted my own budget to accommodate his tuition. I'd thought about it every semester when the bills came due. Where was everyone's concern for family unity when my aunt was taking shots at me? My mother left upset, but I noticed she stopped arguing. Update 1. It's been 2 weeks since everything exploded, and the fallout has been more extensive than I anticipated. My cousin ended up withdrawing from school temporarily. According to the family grapevine, he's working full-time now and planning to reapply for the spring semester at a state school closer to home. He apparently confronted his mother about the lies, and their relationship is fractured. I feel bad about that part, genuinely, but I also recognize I didn't create that situation, his mother did. My aunt has gone scorched earth. She's telling anyone who'll listen that I'm cruel, heartless, that I destroyed her son's life over a harmless joke. She's conveniently leaving out the part where she accepted $84,000 of anonymous support while simultaneously mocking the person providing it. The family has pretty clearly divided into camps. My mother's sisters are mostly siding with my aunt, operating under the belief that family should forgive family regardless of circumstances. My father's side has been more supportive, particularly after he apparently explained the full context at a family gathering I skipped. My younger brother called last week to apologize. He admitted he'd reacted without knowing the full story and said what my aunt did was out of line. The most unexpected support came from my grandmother, my mother's mother. She called Tuesday evening and spent an hour asking me detailed questions about everything that had happened. Then she told me something I'd never known. My aunt had pulled similar behavior her entire life, always pushing boundaries, always testing how much she could get away with. My grandmother said she'd enabled it by always smoothing things over, always asking everyone else to be the bigger person, and she regretted it now. She told me she was proud of me for setting a boundary. That hit harder than I expected. Work has been a welcome distraction. Nobody there knows anything about the family drama, and I've been able to lose myself in projects and deadlines. My boss commented that I seemed more focused than usual, which almost made me laugh. Turns out cutting toxic people out of your life really does free up mental energy. I've been thinking a lot about my father's first marriage lately, about the comment that started all of this. My aunt weaponized his pain, and by extension my family's pain, for a punchline. The more I think about it, the angrier I get. Not the explosive kind of anger, but the cold, settled kind that confirms you made the right decision. My cousin sent me an email last week. It was long, confused, angry in places, but also searching. He wanted to understand why I'd helped him anonymously, why I'd stopped, whether there was any chance I'd reconsider. I spent 2 days drafting a response. I explained everything again, more carefully this time. I told him about the years of small comments from his mother, the casual cruelty disguised as humor, the way she'd consistently treated my generosity as both expected and insufficient. I explained that supporting his education had never been about him owing me anything, but it also couldn't continue in an environment where his mother felt entitled to mock me publicly. I also told him something I hadn't fully articulated before, that watching his mother accept my help while simultaneously diminishing me had become intolerable, that every tuition payment had started feeling less like generosity and more like funding my own disrespect. His response came yesterday, shorter this time. He said he understood better now, that he'd had conversations with his mother that opened his eyes to patterns he'd never noticed before. He didn't ask me to reconsider the financial support. He just said he was sorry for how things turned out and that he hoped someday we could have a relationship separate from all of this. I appreciated that more than he probably knew. Update 2. A month has passed, and I'm writing this from my father's workshop. We've been spending more time together lately, working on a boat restoration project he's had on the back burner for years. It's given us space to talk about things we'd never really discussed before. He told me last week that my aunt's comment at dinner had gutted him. Not because it was new information, he's made peace with his first marriage ending, but because it showed how little his own family respected his journey. He'd spent years rebuilding his life, found genuine happiness with my mother, raised kids he was proud of, and his sister-in-law reduced all of it to a punchline about being alone. We talked about forgiveness, about whether I'd eventually reconcile with my aunt. I told him honestly I didn't know. Forgiveness isn't my problem. I can forgive the comment, even understand it came from a place of drunken thoughtlessness. What I can't reconcile is the entitlement. The assumption that she could accept years of financial support while treating me as lesser. My father nodded and said something that stuck with me. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is let them experience the full consequences of their choices. That my aunt had spent years insulated from consequences by family members who absorbed her behavior to keep the peace. Maybe this was the wake-up call she needed. The family dynamics have shifted in unexpected ways. My mother's relationship with her sister has become strained. According to my grandmother, my mother finally confronted my aunt about the pattern of behavior, the years of boundary pushing that everyone had excused. It apparently didn't go well. My cousin started at community college this semester. He's working part-time and taking a reduced course load, planning to transfer to a state university next year. He sent me a brief message letting me know, not asking for anything, just updating me. I appreciated the gesture. Several extended family members have reached out privately to say they understood my decision, even if they couldn't say so publicly. That's been validating in its own way, confirming that my aunt's behavior wasn't invisible to everyone, just conveniently ignored. I've been reflecting on the broader lesson in all of this. For years, I'd operated under the assumption that quiet generosity was its own reward, that doing the right thing anonymously was somehow more noble. And maybe it is, in theory. But in practice, it created a dynamic where someone could benefit from my generosity while simultaneously dismissing me, never connecting the two. I don't regret the anonymity. I still believe my cousin deserved support regardless of his mother's behavior. But I do recognize now that boundaries matter more than unconditional generosity, that you can be kind without being a doormat. That family doesn't get infinite chances to disrespect you simply because you share DNA. My dating life, ironically, has actually improved. The comment about being alone forever apparently motivated me to be more intentional about putting myself out there. I've been on several dates in the past month, nothing serious yet, but it's been nice to feel like I'm actively choosing my life rather than just reacting to other people's expectations. My aunt hasn't contacted me directly since that initial phone call. Through the family grapevine, I've heard she's struggling financially, working extra hours to cover basic expenses now that her son's tuition isn't mysteriously being handled. Part of me feels guilty about that. A smaller part recognizes that this is exactly what she claimed she was doing for the past 3 years anyway. My mother asked me last week if I'd consider helping my aunt with smaller expenses, maybe groceries or utilities, as a gesture of reconciliation. I declined, not out of spite, but because I recognized now that financial support had become the foundation of a deeply unhealthy dynamic. My aunt needs to rebuild her life on honest terms, not on the hidden subsidies she'd come to expect. The most surprising development has been my relationship with my father. We've always been close, but this situation has deepened our connection in unexpected ways. Working on the boat together, talking through complex family dynamics, acknowledging pain we'd both carried silently. It's been healing in ways I didn't know I needed. He told me yesterday that watching me set a firm boundary had inspired him to address some of his own relationship patterns. That he'd spent years being the peacekeeper, absorbing other people's bad behavior to maintain surface-level harmony, and it had cost him more than he'd realized. I'm not sure what the long-term outcome of all this will be. Maybe my aunt and I will eventually rebuild some kind of relationship, probably different from what we had before. Maybe my cousin and I will develop a connection independent of his mother. Maybe the family dynamics will permanently shift, creating new alliances and divides. What I do know is that I'm at peace with my decision. The anger has faded, replaced by clarity. I set a boundary, enforced a consequence, and refused to absorb someone else's cruelty for the sake of keeping the peace. That doesn't make me cruel or vindictive. It makes me someone who finally learned the difference between kindness and self-abandonment. During family dinner, my aunt laughed and said I'd probably be alone forever, just like my father. She thought it was a throwaway comment, a bit of harmless teasing over dessert. She didn't know she was burning through $84,000 of goodwill with a single sentence. I said nothing in that moment. But the next morning, she found out exactly how much my silence had been worth. And honestly, I'd make the same choice again. If you like the story, please subscribe us and do like this video.